It happens in a single moment. A flashing light in your rearview mirror, a voice at your door, a uniform standing just a little too close. And suddenly, without warning, something you believed was yours isn't. You thought you had a right, but what if it was only a privilege all along? Before we go any further, I want you to think about this carefully. What is something in your life you believe is your absolute right? Something no one can take away. And are you completely sure about that? I want you to pause for a second and really consider it. And if you have an answer, drop it in the comments. Because the difference between rights and privileges is not just a legal technicality. It's a line that quietly shapes your freedom, your safety, and sometimes your future. Most people move through life assuming they understand their rights. We hear the word constantly, on the news, in movies, in heated arguments online. It's my right. You can't do that. I know my rights. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Many of those statements are built on a misunderstanding, and that misunderstanding can cost you. To really understand this, we have to go back to the foundation of law itself. Long before modern governments existed, philosophers were already debating what humans are inherently entitled to. Think about thinkers like John Locke, who argued that certain rights are natural: life, liberty, and property, things that exist simply because you are human. These are what we call rights. They are not granted by a government. They are recognized by it. And that distinction is critical. A right, in its pure legal sense, is something that cannot be taken away without due process of law. It is protected, often written into constitutions or fundamental legal frameworks. It is enforceable in court. And most importantly, it does not depend on your behavior to exist. A privilege, on the other hand, is something granted to you under certain conditions. It can be limited, it can be regulated, and yes, it can be taken away. Now here's where things get interesting and where most people get it wrong. Let's take a simple, everyday example: driving a car. Millions of people believe driving is a right. After all, it feels essential. You need it for work, for family, for daily life. But legally speaking, driving is not a right. It is a privilege, and that's why it comes with conditions. You need a license. You must follow traffic laws. You can lose that privilege if you break those rules, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. And courts around the world, including in countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and many others, have consistently reinforced this idea. Driving is regulated for public safety, and because it is a privilege, the government has broader authority to control it. Now pause and think about that. Something so central to modern life is not actually guaranteed. So what else might fall into that category? Let's move deeper. Consider freedom of speech. This is often described as a fundamental right in democratic societies. But even here, the reality is more nuanced than most people realize. Freedom of speech is indeed a right, but it is not absolute. There are legal boundaries: defamation, incitement to violence, threats, and certain forms of harmful expression. These restrictions exist not to eliminate the right, but to balance it against the rights of others. And this is where the legal system reveals something subtle but powerful. Rights often exist in tension with one another. Your right to speak freely does not override someone else's right to safety or reputation. Now ask yourself this: where do you think that balance should be drawn? Should speech ever be limited, or should it remain completely unrestricted? Think about it, because there's no simple answer. Let's step into another area: education. In many countries, access to basic education is considered a right, especially for children. Governments are often required to provide it. But higher education? That's a different story. University education is typically treated as a privilege. It's accessible, yes, but conditional, based on qualifications, resources, and sometimes financial ability. And that distinction matters because it determines what you can demand versus what you can apply for. Now imagine standing in a courtroom. A judge looks at your case. Whether something is a right or a privilege could change everything about how that case is decided. If it's a right, the burden is on the state to justify limiting it. If it's a privilege, the burden often shifts to you to show why you should keep it. This difference is not just legal theory. It plays out in real lives every single day. Take the example of voting. In many democracies, voting is considered a fundamental right. But even here, conditions exist: age requirements, citizenship status, registration processes. So is voting a right or a privilege? Legally, it is a right, but one that is structured through procedural requirements. And that's where things can become confusing because sometimes rights are exercised through systems that resemble privileges. This gray area is where many misunderstandings happen. Let's bring this closer to real-world consequences. Imagine someone is stopped by law enforcement. They refuse to cooperate, believing they are exercising their rights. But what they're asserting may not actually be a right in that context. For example, you have the right to remain silent in many legal systems, but you may still be required to provide identification under certain circumstances. That requirement is often tied to regulatory authority, not a violation of your rights. Misunderstanding that distinction can escalate situations quickly. And this is why legal literacy matters. Not just knowing your rights, but understanding their limits, their context, and their relationship to privileges. Because the law does not operate on assumptions. It operates on definitions. Now let's go even deeper into the philosophical core of this distinction. Rights are often described as inherent. Privileges are conditional. But here's the paradox. In practice, even rights can be limited under certain conditions. For example, during states of emergency, governments may impose restrictions that affect rights. Curfews, movement controls, surveillance measures. These actions are typically justified under legal doctrines that allow temporary limitations for the greater public good. But they must meet strict criteria: necessity, proportionality, and legality. And this raises a powerful question. If a right can be limited, is it still absolute? Or is the concept of absolute rights more ideal than reality? This is where law intersects with ethics, politics, and human judgment. Because ultimately, the law is not just a set of rules. It is a system designed to balance competing interests. Your freedom and someone else's safety, your autonomy and society's order, your rights and the privileges that structure daily life. Now think about your own life again. Your job, is it a right or a privilege? Your access to social media platforms, is that a right or a privilege? What about traveling freely, owning property, starting a business? Each of these sits somewhere on a spectrum. And understanding where they fall can change how you navigate the world. Let's take social media as an example. Many people believe they have a right to express themselves on platforms, but legally, these platforms are private entities. Access to them is a privilege, governed by terms of service. That's why accounts can be suspended or banned, not because your fundamental rights have been removed, but because you're using a service under agreed conditions. This distinction is often misunderstood, and it fuels a lot of confusion and debate. So here's another question for you. Do you think platforms should be treated more like public spaces, where rights apply more strongly? Or should they remain private spaces with enforceable rules? There's no universal answer yet, and courts around the world are still grappling with this issue. Now let's bring everything together. The legal difference between rights and privileges is not just about definitions. It's about power, responsibility, and structure. Rights protect you from unjust interference. Privileges allow systems to function with order and accountability. Without rights, individuals are vulnerable. Without privileges, systems become unmanageable, and the law exists to hold that balance. But here's the final and perhaps most important realization. Knowing your rights is not enough. Understanding their limits is what truly protects you. Because in the moments that matter most, when decisions are made quickly, when authority is present, when consequences are real, it is not confidence that guides outcomes. It is clarity. So as you move forward, I want you to carry this awareness with you. Question assumptions. Understand the difference. And recognize that what feels like a right may sometimes be a privilege in disguise. And what appears to be a limitation may actually be the law trying to protect something deeper. Now I want to hear from you. What's one thing you used to think was a right, but now see differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because the more we understand this distinction, the more control we gain over our place within the system that governs us all.